All right, well, welcome everyone to another Friday of High Tech Live. Bienvenidos. If you're new to High Tech Live, welcome. I'm Viviana. It's such a pleasure to have you here. These are our bi-monthly series where we bring together the Hispanic technology community together to connect, share, and learn something new. As you guys know, these are informal conversations where we get to hear from our partners and our community members to learn anything from tech, leadership, D&I, and everything in between. Today, we're going to be talking about virtual and augmented reality in the workplace with our friends at Cognizant. So before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. Let's be sure to keep our mics muted. And if you have questions, please share them in the chat throughout the session. We'll be collecting them and then get to them towards the end of the session. But as always, share your thoughts and comments in the chat and keep it engaged. And then finally, we have our networking session at the end of the conversation. So if you guys want to continue chatting with us, please stay on. So without further ado, let's get started. Please welcome Duncan Roberts and Eduardo Plastino of Cognizant Center for the Future of Work. Thank you both for being with us here today. To lead the discussion, we have Eduardo, who is the director at Cognizant Center for the Future of Work, the company's internal think tank. He joined the company last April from Accenture Research, where he then led the Latin American team. Eduardo, bienvenido. Please take it away.
Muchas gracias. Oh, hello, everyone. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Nice to be here. Thanks for having us. I actually won't take too much of your time because that's going to be Duncan. He's the expert here. So my colleague Duncan is the perfect person to just lead this, what I think will be a very interesting conversation on the metaverse and what it means for businesses. And before we continue, I have to say we had no idea that Facebook was going to announce their new name yesterday. This was not coordinated, but it does show, I think, the timeliness of the discussion and how important and increasingly serious this is being taken by businesses as it should be. So a couple of words about why Duncan is the perfect person to conduct this discussion. So Duncan actually started working with VR back in 2015. The following year, he was already producing some prototypes. He's been invited by Google to participate in a couple of their projects on VR, AR, and he has also sat in a number of panels reviewing the ethics of AR and VR, and also he's been, of course, working in this area within our own team at the Cognizant Center for the Future of Work. So Duncan, thanks so much for making yourself available to speak to us about this. I will be here in the background, just actually taking some notes of the questions that people, I'm sure, will have about this fascinating topic. But please do take the floor and help us understand this a little bit better. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks, Eduardo. Can everybody hear me okay? Just to start off with, I had a few technical difficulties to begin. Great, excellent, thanks very much. Okay, so we're going to make this a little bit of a user participation session. Not too much, I know that usually strikes fear into the hearts of most people, as it does me. But there'll just be a few questions to answer that will just give a little bit more color to the conversation, I think. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just share my screen a second and move this one out of the way for 2 ticks. Hopefully any second now, you should be able to see this presentation. Share. And I can present, so you can't see all the back end of this. So can everybody see that that page there?
Yes,
Yep.
We are good, Duncan. Thank you.
Excellent. Right. So I'm using a tool called Mentimeter. And what that is just a way in which you can answer questions that I ask you during the session. So if you have a mobile device available, or if you're on your PC or laptop, you can go to menti.com and enter the code, or if you're feeling extravagant, you can scan the QR code and it should take you directly to the presentation. And you won't see the questions, or at least I hope you won't see the questions until we get there. So that's just a tiny little bit of housekeeping on that front. But yes, here we are. We're going to be talking about spatial computing and the organizational metaverse. Eduardo mentioned, obviously, the news yesterday about Facebook renaming their company to Meta. I have a lot of thoughts on that I'm sure we'll get to at some stage, but it's a very timely announcement in the scheme of things. And I did have an inkling through some sources that was going to happen. And I think I was talking to Eduardo about it yesterday, and I said, I can mention that they might be doing that. And lo and behold, a few hours later, it happened. But Eduardo and I work, as we say, for a company called Cognizant in the Centre for the Future of Work. And if you haven't heard of Cognizant for any reason, we are a large 300,000 strong technical services company. And until recently, you may not have heard of us, but fairly recently, we started splashing our name all over a Formula One car. And we got a bit more promotion because of that. And me personally, as a massive motorsports fan, it was a bit awkward because I've always supported other teams, but now I have to find myself supporting this particular one. So yeah, so what we're talking about today and why should I be talking about it? Well, as Eduardo mentioned, I was dabbling around with VR in 2015, and Oculus, the company, who was an individual company at that point, released something called the DK1, and that was a developer headset, and I started tinkering around with that, and I produced a few early stage prototype experiences with that, just for the fun of it, really. But through that, I got contacted by Google, who were producing what you can see on the right, which is their Google Daydream View VR headset, which sadly no longer exists, because as with Google, they kill lots of their products quite early. But I also produced some apps for their AR Core platform, which is the way in which their phones manage any AR experiences. So I produced a few launch apps for when they launched that platform. And that's really got me, excited about VR and AR. I can see its potential, and I've been involved in the industry in one way or another for quite some time now. And then I joined the Centre for the Future of Work at Cognizant, specifically to be able to talk, research, and write about this and other topics. So first question, I would like to ask you, have you tried virtual and augmented reality? And there's a simple yes, no answer, but also a bit of a wild card there saying, no, I don't want to. And yeah, it'd be great to see some answers come in from that. I'll give it a few seconds. Okay, this is good. Anybody having any issues, then yeah, just pop it in the chat and I can see the code going into the chat there. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Okay, well, I mean, it's very good that there's no I don't want to's there because it's nice to see that people are interested. So 7 of you have, 3 of you haven't. And I think this is an important question to ask, because when we talk about VR and AR, it's a very difficult technology to describe. You can talk about virtual space and having your head and your body and your hands tracked and interacting with other people in VR as much as you want, but you can't understand it really until you've experienced it. So those of you who haven't had the opportunity to try it, I would encourage you to have a go. Seek out somebody who has a headset, seek out somebody who is willing to let you have a shot at this, because it really is an engaging experience. But there's a lot of talk at the moment about the metaverse. We have Facebook renaming their umbrella company to Meta. That is a huge signal, and there's a huge amount of investment going to go along with that. We have them also hiring 10,000 European workers at least to work on this concept alone. That's huge. And this is just one company. Facebook dominates the consumer market for AR and VR with its Oculus Quest. There are other people who are providing headsets and experiences and software platforms, but in terms of pure dominance of the consumer market, it's all Facebook. But what we'll see is that renaming of the company and that focus from them will have a trickle-down effect. It will explode, and there will be much more investment in this area going forward. But Metaverse is, there is no doubt, a hype word. It's something that gets bandied around on social media by Mark Zuckerberg, and I think that there's actually an issue with what does it actually mean. I think that not a lot of people really know what it means, or it means different things to different people. So my next question is, what's your opinion on that? Are you super eager? Do you want to get plugged in straight away? Do you not really know what it is? Do you care? Or do you think it's absolutely ridiculous? Which I must say, you are more than entitled to think it's crazy. So I'll give that a few more, well, a minute or so more, just to see how we get on. Okay. Cool. Right. So we've got 10 results in. I'll move on, but please feel free to keep answering if you're thinking about it, and the slide will update. But I think that's really interesting that most people say, oh, well, equal people say, I don't know what it is as to plug me in. And we do have somebody who's ambivalent. I must stress that this is anonymous, so I don't know who's asking, who's answering in what sense. So I'm not going to be calling anybody out. But I think it's really interesting. We've got a reasonably now equal split between people who are very keen for it and those who don't really understand what it is. And that's great, because that's what I want to talk about in this presentation. And if you're feeling ambivalent, hopefully I can sway you one way or the other in this talk to say what I think it is and how I think it's going to affect business specifically going forward. Now, a lot of time, people think metaverse, they think science fiction. It was indeed a term that was coined by a guy called Neil Stephenson in a novel called Snow Crash. So it's not entirely unreasonable to think this is just science fiction, whatever. And this is the sort of thing, I think I Googled metaverse and found the most fantastical picture I could, this mishmash of science fiction tropes. But people just think, you know, it is this concept that comes from science fiction. We'll all be living digitally in this world where we'll all look strange and be running around with laser guns and spaceships. But actually, what it looks like today, at least, is a bit more like this, which is lots and lots of brands and companies and players in the VR market releasing different apps to do different things. And of course, a massive overlap in what those apps are trying to do as well. So we have things like AltSpace VR and Rec Room, which are social VR apps. We have Magic Leap, who are producing augmented reality glasses. We have Facebook in Oculus producing games and social VR applications. It's very fragmented. There are lots of different ways to enter what people are calling the metaverse. And this is not one concept. It is a series of apps that you use to do what you want to do with that app at the time. And that is a really, really important concept, I believe, for understanding what the metaverse is going to look like, both in a consumer sense and a business sense. So what do we have in a business sense? Well, we have things like, this is just a small example of the use cases for spatial computing. On the top left, we have somebody wearing AR glasses in a manufacturing setting, looking at all the information that's coming from their IoT sensors in real time, in physical space in front of them, so they don't have to keep referring to a laptop, so they don't have to have notepads and clipboards. It's there, it's in front of them. They can use videos displayed in real space that instruct them how to use certain equipment, or they can have overlays on a piece of, on a prototype material that tells them how to put it all together. On the top right-hand side, we have somebody doing a bit of VR training. VR training is enormous at the moment. It's an area that through my research, you can definitely see the trend for VR training is expanding rapidly. The ability to put somebody into virtual space and to allow them to physically interact with items rather than learning about it through a video or having to go somewhere where they can do that work and they can only do that once, rather than in VR, they can repeat that experience again and again and again and learn better. It is really valuable. So we're seeing that expand enormously at the moment. Bottom left, we have some people designing products and using VR to have a look at those digital twins of products or those prototypes. The ability to look at something and interact with it in 3D space stops you from having to create or 3D print, for example, prototype after prototype after prototype. It cuts costs, it saves time, it's more engaging, it's more interactive. And then we have healthcare on the bottom right-hand side, which is actually a space where you might not think it, but XR in VR and AR is exploding. There's a lot of medical training going on in VR. There are concepts and pilots going forward to have, as you can see here, surgeons wearing augmented reality headsets so they can overlay their patients with information as they are operating. Again, not having to look up, not having to rely on physical items to look at data, but it's right there in front of them when they need it. And when we talk about the organizational metaverse, it is not as exciting as a science fiction novel where we will be working every day in VR and in AR, and it will be like Minority Report. But what it is there are a system of tools and there is a set of hardware that we can research and we can use to the advantage of your business. And it is in the same way as any other piece of enterprise software and hardware, we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we are choosing the right hardware and the right software. That is what the organizational metaverse is, a suite of tools and nothing more. That's my opinion, I might add. I'm sure there are some people who will disagree with me and like the science fiction idea a little bit more. Quick question, though, to everybody, is how do video calls, like the one we're on at the moment, make you feel? Now, this is going to be a word cloud, so people, you'll be able to enter up to 3 words and those words will start appearing. I'm not going to try and lead you into a particular response, but how do these video calls that you are on since the pandemic, obviously they've exploded in their use. It'd be great to get a sense of how do they make you feel. I'll give it a minute or so for us to put some answers in. And again, this is anonymous, so don't worry if you're worried about what you want to put in. I'll just give it a couple more minutes. Here we go. Great, okay. Okay, I think we've got some really, really interesting answers here, and it's still updating. So we've got connected, great. It's brilliant to be able to connect with our colleagues across geographic boundaries. I can talk to you here from London with Eduardo in Brazil and other colleagues in the US and wherever we are. It's brilliant to have that connection. But we're also seeing some other words come up here, which are exhausted, sometimes disconnected, can't read the room, overwhelmed. I don't want to focus on the negative too much because, of course, video calls have been a lifesaver during the pandemic. They have made us better connected. They have kept us engaged and productive, and they are interactive. But I think overuse of them and just over the time that we've all spent having video call day after day after day, I think there is an element of us feeling a little bit of Zoom fatigue. So this is a very evocative slide of somebody rubbing their neck as they're on yet another video call. And this is another really important aspect of the research that I've been doing is, yes, XR is a suite of tools to use at the right time, but it also, video calling and interacting with our colleagues we are using tools to interact with our colleagues more and more. And we're seeing a requirement for that to happen long into the future and beyond, because of remote work is here to stay, be it hybrid or fully remote. We in the Centre for the Future of Work have done a little bit of research that shows that there is obviously a skills issue going on at the moment in various places. So the net that companies are having to cast out in order to get the people with the right skills into their companies is having to be widened, is having to go global instead of just regional. And of course, the big one with COP26 coming up is sustainability. We're not all jetting off on business class flights anymore to go and see our colleagues for a meeting. That's not seen as necessarily responsible behavior from an organization in terms of ESG work. So what VR and AR can also do is actually connect us to our colleagues. And this is a bit more of that metaverse-y social experience that you might think immediately when you think of the metaverse. But again, this is like video calls. It's a tool that is used to connect you to your colleagues. We are not expecting you to jump into a VR room to connect with your colleague when you could just make a quick phone call. This is for experiences where you need to connect with your colleagues and express yourself and have that natural human interaction that we feel enables better work to be done. I actually ran a meeting with a couple of my colleagues, including Eduardo, in VR not too long ago, but Eduardo and my colleague don't have VR headsets, so they were joined through the webcam. It was interesting, it was engaging, but I think there's work to do in actually how this all comes together. But when you have multiple people all wearing VR headsets and engaged in a room, those of you who have used VR may agree with me. Those of you who haven't might not know, but it is very quick for that sense of being in VR to fall away and for you to start collaborating and interacting with those people who you're with very naturally. Just as an anecdote, when the pandemic first hit, there was a friend of mine who I hadn't seen or really spoken to very much for about 5 years. And he happened to text me saying, "Hey, you've got a VR headset, so have I, should we do something?" And then every week for the rest of lockdown, we would go and have a game of poker. And it was massively engaging. I felt like I was spending time with my friends, and it was a real lifesaver. Extrapolate that into the business world, and you're meeting and connecting with those people who you're far away from and not experiencing the same sort of fatigue and staring at your colleagues on a Zoom screen. It's remarkable, actually. So yeah, let me just move on quickly. There are issues. There's no doubt about it. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. This is a picture of actually one of the first generation Oculus headsets, but the design and the philosophy of that design hasn't changed much in the past 3 or 4 years, although with some announcements even yesterday, that is, they're making quite big strides. But ultimately, the hardware is clunky, it's heavy, it's hot. It requires you to set it up. There used to be lots of cables running everywhere. That's that's getting a lot better now as we see more standalone headsets, but they're still quite hot and heavy. I would say that a couple of the prototypes that we've seen announced over the past few weeks significantly change that. They're standalone, they're lightweight, they look much more akin to a pair of glasses than this does. Looks like a brick attached to your face. And we will be seeing that's only going to get better. The companies who are creating this hardware are aware of this, and they want to remove that friction that goes along with wearing virtual reality and augmented reality headsets. The second point is there is the avatars that you display. They're a little bit cartoony. Some might call them childish. They're not exact recreations of who we are. So this can be seen as possibly a barrier to entry. If you look at these on flat screen, you go, I'm not going to be able to connect with somebody who looks like a cartoon. It is surprising how when these things are in motion and you can get your body language cues off them, how engaging they are. But again, this is something that's being worked on, and real lifelike representations of people are being worked on. And with cameras around the headsets, they can actually film your face and recreate that on an avatar remarkably accurately. So that's one thing coming up. But the big one actually is not as exciting as 3D space and avatars and virtual reality. It's about data privacy. What was really interesting is there was a study done by Stanford University that said that your body movements in terms of how you move your head, where you plant your gaze, how you move your hands and your body language is as unique to you as your fingerprint. And that obviously opens up a lot of questions over data privacy and the ethics of storing and tracking that data. This is important in the consumer space because of the fact that Facebook is one of the biggest players in this market, and their history with personal data is not exactly stellar. But it is also important if you're considering this from an enterprise perspective, because as an employer, you will be collecting a lot of data on your employees once they start using this technology, be it for meetings, be it for manufacturing lines, be it for training sessions. The training session information is actually being used today as trainers are identifying where people are looking, how they are interacting, taking that data and then presenting it back to the trainee to actually understand how they've done. But then what's being done with that data? What's being done with that information about that person? If we don't start thinking about this now, and if we don't start accounting for this in our policies when we use virtual and augmented reality in the workplace, then it will be a very difficult thing to clean up once we've got all this data out there and being stored not necessarily in the right way. So we have to consider that, and it is a very, very important part of this topic. The next is just being overwhelmed. This is a screenshot from a short film called Hyperreality. You can find it on YouTube if you want to have a look. But it just shows that in an AR-enabled future, you can just be overwhelmed by information. All these different applications shoving information in your face, shoving you advertising, shoving you, as you can see, city points and information about when to get off the bus. That goes the same for VR and AR in the workplace. It can be overwhelming. Sometimes the headsets can be uncomfortable to wear. They're getting better, but you have to appreciate this when you're using this with your employees. So making sure that you are able to take a step back and make sure that you're focusing on the real world. And much like we say to people, get up, take a step away from your computer and go for a walk or go and speak to your family and friends. The same goes for get out of virtual space and go and see the real world for some time, because it can be overwhelming. I just want to take you back to this slide just to finish up what I'm talking about, because I think it's really important, and it's the message that I want to get across. The metaverse as it stands is just a system of tools, and there are tools and there are applications for VR and AR in an ever expanding set of use cases for the workplace. So you may think, I don't have any need for that. Well, actually, you potentially might. So it's worth investigating, looking at a particular use case that you think might benefit from AR, VR use, run a pilot and see how it goes, because the results might surprise you. So, okay. We've got some time for questions now. I hope everybody found that interesting. I'll hand back to Eduardo just to read some questions out potentially and see where we go from there.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks so much, Duncan. Really fascinating stuff. Actually, I do have a few questions for you. So I'm sure people will have their own questions. We already have a couple in the chat box. But if you don't mind starting with one from myself.
Of course.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, I have to tell people that our meeting was really interesting in the metaverse and very different from our regular meetings. But you are right. I was a bit disappointed because, as an Argentinian football fan, I wanted to have a Lionel Messi avatar and I couldn't.
I remember you saying that to me. I said, sorry, you've just got to look like you.
Yeah, that's a shame. But anyway, so just going back to the Facebook announcement, I was a bit shocked that they not just said that they wanted to work in the metaverse or compete in the metaverse, but actually want to be a metaverse company. So what does it actually mean in for the business and for what they do?
So in terms of Facebook being a metaverse company, there's a couple of things there. One, it's really exciting in some respects because of, as I mentioned, the level of investment that they are putting in to the metaverse. And I'll talk about what it means to be a metaverse company in a second. But the level of investment that they are putting in means that this is a big deal. And all the hype and talk around VR and XR that's taken its time to sort of get going is really going to start blowing up now. So in that sense, being a metaverse company is really important there. But what does it mean for Facebook to be a metaverse company? It means they are going to be creating these tools, these experiences, and these hardware products to be able to allow people to enter virtual space more and more and more. You'll notice that in that announcement, they didn't mention gaming at all. It was all about social experiences, connecting people better. So for Facebook to be a metaverse company, you look at what their products do already. Facebook is a social network. Instagram is a social network where people can share pictures. WhatsApp is a communications platform. They see this as a method by which people can communicate and interact more. And I think for them, that's what they mean about it being a metaverse. That's what being a metaverse company means for them, is connecting people through shared virtual spaces. The worry is it's Facebook. So, whatever your opinion on Facebook, they will be collecting personal data, and you need to be careful about how much of that personal data and information you give out, depending on your views on these things. I will say in their defense that one of the big issues recently was Facebook demanding a Facebook account to log into their virtual reality hardware platform. This was a big issue for me in terms of the openness of the metaverse, but they've recently announced that in the future they will allow other forms of login. What those are, I don't know, but having all of these shared virtual spaces, if not completely controlled by Facebook, at least the underlying infrastructure run and controlled by Facebook, run by any one company, is concerning. Much like we have an open internet, we should have an open metaverse that is not controlled by one company. So it's a really interesting, exciting time in that space at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it'd be great to know if there's anyone in attendance who actually works or has worked for Facebook. They have their, views to share about this. Well, I guess not. No one's speaking. So, yeah, no, fascinating stuff. So, actually, there's a question here that's similar to something I had been thinking as well. So, I understand by what you're saying that this data, you're not just our fingerprints, but our look, our gait, our personal data, and therefore it could be subject to GDPR regulations in Europe, for example, or specific US state regulations as well, in California as the leader there. Is that correct? And if so, what does it mean for the development of new products and services?
So in terms of advertising, Facebook's biggest deal is advertising. The way in which if you're in a virtual space that is trying to sell you things, and the company who is controlling that advertising can see where you are looking, how long you are looking at things, what your reaction to it, whether you're turning away, that's incredibly valuable data to them. It's also immediately personally identifiable, as that research has shown and will show going forward. So I believe that this should be subject to some regulation, and we should treat it in the same way as any other personal data. However, the bandwagon's not really rolling on that at the moment. So I'm trying to push this when I talk as much as I can, so that people understand how important it is. And this isn't just in a commercial sense, as I've mentioned. This is in your private metaverse, as it were, in your social life, in these programs that you use for your personal enjoyment. This is also very much the case in your work life, when you're collecting personal data and personal information on your employees. What do you do with that data? How are you storing that information? Because it is collected and it is stored on the headsets and on the platforms that are being run on those headsets.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really interesting. And I'm wondering if we could see a kind of repetition of these dynamics that we have seen. And at least people often say that one of the reasons why the US and increasingly China are really innovative vis-a-vis Europe, for example, is that it's far easier for companies based there to collect data and experiment and so on. And I wonder if this could actually be extrapolated to the metaverse, and we can see the difference explode, if you want, in the next few years. What do you think?
Well, I certainly think that the information that they're gathering is enabling them to sell more of their products, and therefore get more investment, and therefore pump more money into the industry. So if you're not doing that, or you're subject to regulation, then that obviously stifles your opportunity for capital, which is going to have a knock-on impact onto your innovation. So, but I think in terms of how this is regulated, yes, I think it should be regulated. Do I think that's going to impact innovation in the space? Probably a little bit, but not as much as we might think, because the EU actually, a university sponsored by the EU has actually thrown up a metaverse campus in order for all of their students to connect and speak to each other across all their different locations. So I think that there will be innovation regardless of regulation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Let me actually get some of the questions, other questions that people have asked here. So a very interesting one is, what industries are focused on this the most? And at what level do you recommend engaging clients?
So, right.
Think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's really good question. Really good question. So, what industries are focused on this the most? The advanced players in this market are people like manufacturing or design companies, where they are creating digital twins of objects, and they are able to view those designs and those manufacturing lines. They're able to connect them with IoT sensors, and they're able to feed that data to their XR headsets. Those industries are definitely the lead players in this. So I think the company name's just completely gone out of my head. Obviously a massive aerospace company, but they're building the Orion spaceships to take man back to the moon for NASA. They're using Microsoft HoloLenses every day in the way that they produce that stuff to show them where all the bolts should go. But this is not to say that this needs to be a technical, used in a technical industry. As I said, the connection, the replacement for Zoom calls means that this can be rolled out amongst knowledge-based industries as well. I think that's going to be a harder sell, no doubt. You can't just say, okay, right, you roll out 1,000 virtual reality headsets and all of our meetings are now going to be in VR. That's a pretty hard sell straight off the bat. So if you're looking to speak to clients about that, then roll it out small. Start off small. Start off with some pilots. Get evangelists behind you, and then you can start to scale it. Because the more people believe in it, the more they're going to not have this concept of the science fiction metaverse and it being a toy used for gaming. But if you start small and roll it out, that would be great. The biggest other thing that we're seeing at the moment, as I mentioned before, other than this manufacturing, design, digital twin area, is in training. And that's not necessarily specifically for hard skills training, even though we've seen Shell, the oil company, recreate an entire oil rig in VR and have their people who are working on the oil rigs learn how to lock the pumps, how to turn all the handles, and use all the safety equipment correctly without having to be flown out to an oil rig to do it, or having to shut off part of an oil rig to train their people. So those hard skill trainings are really important and save a lot of money and a lot of time. But for immersive soft skills training, it's also a massive game changer. So if you're doing some e-learning, usually that takes the form of a couple of, maybe a video, maybe a slideshow where you have to answer some questions. That's not massively engaging. If you use VR or AR to put somebody in a situation that you're trying to train them with, collaboratively with other people who are also doing that, which you can do, then your level of immersion, your level of engagement, and the amount that people are learning suddenly increases dramatically. There are some stats on that I can share for sure, through a company that I've been discussing this with, who specialize in VR training, and it is marked how much it can do. Even showing somebody a video of something in 360 degrees 3D video is more engaging than somebody watching it on a screen. So we're seeing that right across the board, and that's industry agnostic. That can be applied to any industry that requires training of its staff, and the potential there is huge.
Yeah, I know. Just you reminded me of this example that I saw a couple of years ago of, I think it was a university, I don't remember in which American state, that was doing some work with the veterans from Iraq, I think perhaps Afghanistan as well. And those were people with huge, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. Mm-hmm. And what they were doing is making them relive the situation that caused the trauma, but with a psychiatrist next to them, and being able to, stop and talk to people, and they were literally immersed in that situation. And maybe they suffered physically themselves, maybe they lost, a friend in that action, or they saw horrible things. But by going through the same experience time and again, but in a safe, controlled environment with the support of professionals, in the end, those people were able to go back to civilian life and reintegrate much more easily in society. And I thought, well, that's fantastic, actually. And it's essentially a social skill, a soft skill, but it's a very crucial one for society. So
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that illustrates the power of it, right?
Completely. The treatment of PTSD through VR is happening more and more, and we're seeing Alzheimer's patients even using it to help treat them. So as a treatment as well as an experience, it's a game changer, and you're seeing some very real results. So healthcare, again, thinking about how you can use that immersive technology to not just help your staff, but help your patients. So extrapolate that to, don't just help your employees, help your customers. What can you use VR and AR to bring to your customers that you struggle to bring to them now? There are opportunities there as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. There's a question here that's actually quite relevant. How long can you wear, a VR headset for continuously?
Good
and
question.
I would add to that, has that changed with, the recent announcements and new products, and what do you expect to happen in the next few years?
Yes. So when I got my first DK1, which was basically a mobile phone screen with a computer behind it, strapped to a massive box that hanged off my face, I could wear it for maybe 20 minutes at a time. And the experience was terribly uncomfortable. It only tracked in 3 degrees of freedom. So I could only look left and right, up and down, or side to side. If I moved forward, it wouldn't track me. So I'd immediately feel sick. That they've changed a lot. So my most recent headset that I use, which is a Valve Index, is immeasurably better. It's lighter. It tracks me in complete 3D space. I can wear that for I probably have worn it for a couple of hours, 3 hours at a time. But I'm an exceptional case. I'm somebody who uses VR a lot. I think you could probably wear that for an hour or more at a time without any issue. The most recent announcements, so this is a big deal for the people making the headsets. There's a new headset called the Vive Flow made by HTC, which really resembles a pair of Willy Wonka glasses, funnily enough. And it's very light. It's I can't remember the exact weight of it, but it's extremely light, just a bit heavier than a pair of glasses. The Oculus in Facebook, or Meta, I get confused with what to call them now, they've just announced a new prototype for a headset, which is much lighter than their current headsets. And HTC Vive have an enterprise headset that even includes a little fan in it that keeps you cool while you wear it. So, and also, just, I must add, on the nausea thing, if you get nausea through a virtual reality experience, it's one of two things. It's because it's natural to you to get motion sickness, or it's a badly designed experience. And more often than not, it's a badly designed experience. So if the experience is designed well and accommodates for all different people and the way in which they experience motion sickness, you will not feel it. There are things that are going on to try and improve that. I think there's a Sony PSVR 2 is actually going to include haptics in the headset that tap your temples, so that to make the brain think that you're moving, and that's combating nausea. So there's a huge amount of work going on in this space to make it to get over the friction of going into VR and AR.
That's fascinating. Now, there's an interesting business question here about, this new appetite that the Facebooks of this world and other juggernauts from Silicon Valley entering this realm now. So what's going to happen to the founding, VR, AR companies that have been doing much of the work for the last several years, such as Half-Life, for example?
So good question. The consumer space is very different from the enterprise space. The consumer space is dominated by Facebook. It was initially dominated by Oculus, who Facebook bought for a couple of billion, and Valve, who made Half-Life and who made the headset that I currently own, the Index, and run Steam, the massive gaming platform. But Facebook is really trying to assert a monopoly at the moment. There is no doubt about that. I'm hopeful that that won't happen because competition is good. It's not because it's Facebook necessarily. It's just you need more competition. But the enterprise space, Oculus and Facebook are actually one of the smallest players. The enterprise space is incredibly competitive and incredibly diverse. You have hardware manufacturers like Varjo, a Finnish company, who create retina display headsets that are used in flight simulators and training. Incredibly expensive, but incredibly amazing headsets that are nowhere near as bad. They're so much better than the consumer experience. It's crazy. You have HTC with Vive. You have Pico with a Chinese company, Pico Neo, who incidentally, TikTok's owner ByteDance are trying to buy. So there's a social data question there as well. Then you have all the different platforms. I mean, I couldn't name them all, but you have Spatial, AltSpace, Rec Room, Microsoft with its Mesh platform. They're going big on enterprise AR and VR. The enterprise space is actually much more exciting in terms of its advancement and the competition than the sort of the personal market.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. I think we do, right? 2 minutes yet. So what's the most prevalent development platform for VR and AR? Is there a prevalent platform?
I think that goes back to my last point. Obviously, in the consumer space, it's Facebook's Oculus or Meta platform. I think they've got a bit confused with how they're naming their headsets and their platforms, because even their lead CTO got it wrong yesterday. So that's quite interesting. But it's definitely Facebook in the consumer space. In the enterprise space, I think it depends on the industry that you're looking at, because there are so many different companies doing so many different things. This is what I really meant about the due diligence. You should do the due diligence for what you are looking for in the same way as you would any other enterprise system. Because if you're looking for a point solution for VR meetings, there are, if not hundreds, at least nearly hundreds of different companies that are trying to do this. And they're all pretty good. They all have their advantages and they all have their disadvantages. If you're looking at manufacturing and more technical design things, there are companies who have been investing in this that are traditionally from the old traditional world of 3D CAD design, or it's Microsoft who have always been in this area and are just pushing a new platform. But there are also new players in this who bring an element of the new, the innovative to this that you might not get from those people. So in the consumer market, it's easy to say. In the enterprise market, it's not easy to say, but that's a good thing, because if you do your due diligence, you will end up with a good platform and a good set of hardware that can advance your business.
No, that's great. And just to wrap up here, I'm curious because you keep making this distinction between the enterprise and the consumer markets. Do you think people's professional and personal lives are going to cross over when using these technologies? Or are they going to be completely separate and kept in separate realms?
So I think that it depends. It depends, that's a cop-out answer, but I'll explain myself. So when you are using XR for work, it is highly unlikely that you would cross over with your consumer experience of VR XR if you're using in both spaces. So I'm not going to invite my wife into a meeting that I'm having with Eduardo because Eduardo is devilishly handsome. So
I'm fine. I must all well behave.
So, but this leads me to an interesting point about the consumer metaverse, which is that if you have these shared social spaces which are being used by consumers and by advertisers to push sales, and people are using this for their social life, there will be people who are in that social space who are working. So the consumer metaverse, or some of the consumer tools that people use to have fun, will have people who work within them. So some people's work will be the consumer metaverse, if that makes sense.
Yes, makes a lot of sense.
And I think brilliant. if you look at some jobs of the future, I think it was Muse, the band, who have recently started performing in VR and doing gigs at scheduled times in VR. And if you look at that as a social experience and people just pop in, you're going to need people to help people, to guide them around those spaces and to maybe sell them some digital merchandise. You might not want to do it completely through VR or artificial intelligence, or through them using a voice assistant to bring up some information. Actually, sometimes it's better to get somebody into VR in there helping people, and as part of that social experience. I'll leave you just one more thing. There's a great VR experience called the Under Presents, which would at scheduled times throughout a week, every week, put on a performance of a play in VR. And you would be standing there or sitting there with 12 or 15 people who are there as paying customers to go and watch that play. And then there would be 3 or 4 actors who were wearing VR headsets and have their bodies tracked, who would then act out a play. Those actors were working. The people who are there are consuming. So there is a crossover in that respect.
Right. Well, it's amazing. It does make me think that, the headsets themselves will have to be slimmer and lighter, because otherwise you can imagine just acting with that stuff.
Yeah.
So a final question from Jason is actually a very good one. So do you think phishing, social engineering schemes are going to be more of a concern with this? I mean, they are a huge concern already, but I can see why he's asking. The potential is massive.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think if you look at this, if you look at that concept that I spoke about, where you could be identified through your bodily movements, it's like your fingerprints. It's biometric data, and if you're able to take that biometric data somehow and recreate it, you're socially engineered. All of a sudden your banks are empty.
Yeah,
so exactly. I absolutely think so, 100%.
Excellent. Okay, so it's 3 past. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been fascinating. I'm really, really happy that Maria invited us to be here today. It was a great session. Thank you so much, Duncan. I'm not sure how many people will stay for the networking event. Definitely have a few minutes.
Perfect. I love it. Well, I want to thank Duncan and Eduardo for being on this. This was fascinating, and I just feel like the time flew by. So thank you so much for sharing. For those that want to stay on and maybe continue the conversation a little bit longer, please do. But if not, thank you all so much for joining, and have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks. I'll stick
Thank you.
around for a few minutes to see if anybody wants to chat away.
Sounds good.